I'm Shanah Morehead, and this is my testimony. I went through a lot in my life, and I'm trying to navigate telling my story, not telling too much, not taking too long. But there were many things in my life that caused me to struggle with what I know now is or was the spirit of rejection. So as a child, my mom died when I was very young. She was young and I was very young, and I went to live with my father, who for me, I can't speak for anybody else or my other siblings, because he had many other children, but he was very abusive emotionally to me. And we dealt with a lot of his addictive behaviors. You know, I always say that no matter what he did, it always was to excess. If he drank, it was excess. If it was women, it was excess. When he gambled, it was excess. Everything was in excess. And I won't get into now like so many generational curses, and people don't understand the reasons why they act certain ways or feel certain ways are basically because of generational curses that are passed down and not broken, and not cast out. So for me, I went through my life always, people say, oh, you're so smart or beautiful, whatever it was that they used to describe me. You could tell me that all day, but inside, internally, I could not feel that. There was not a connection because of that spirit of rejection. In our marriage, our roles were reversed. So for years, I was the one who spiritually held down everything in my house. And I had been praying and praying and praying and praying for years that God would, help my husband and allow him to see himself and use him. So that was my major prayer. At night when he slept, I would anoint his head and I would anoint his feet, and I would pray over him. And I would fast, and not for him, for the kids. And for 20 years, it seemed like nothing was happening. But I continued on. I continued doing everything that I was doing as unto the Lord. So everything, and someone asked me, how would you describe those years? And I said it, my marriage was my ministry. Everything that I did was unto the Lord. So even when, my husband would go a week without speaking to me and I would cry myself to sleep, I would still cook for him. I would still make his plate. I would still pray for him. There was, not to say, because of my love for Christ, though those things, even though some people may say, like, how could you do that? Or, that must have been so hard. They just came naturally to me because everything I did was as unto Christ. So when my husband had his transformation and I began to see how God was using him, God was speaking through him. He was able to see things in the spirit. Like, we would be around people and God would just be downloading what they were going through, what to tell them. And I'm standing there like, I was happy because I wanted God to use him, but at the same time, there was still a longing in me, like, okay, God, what about me? And when we went to Atlanta and we went through deliverance, and then we went through, Zoom sessions of deliverance online, there was always, breakthrough, I would say, for Greg, another breakthrough, another level that he would go to. And for me, it was like I was stuck still in the wilderness. So one of the things that the deliverance pastors, when they were taking me through deliverance, and one thing they would say is, Jesus, go to her. They would be speaking to the little girl in me. And they would say, do you see little Shanah, do you see Jesus? And I would just be sitting there and it'd be blank. I couldn't see anything. And, this was maybe 2 or 3 times it happened to me. And so, of course, I joke a lot. So after I got out my sessions and I was telling my boys and Greg, I was like, hey, there goes that spirit of rejection again. Like, I can't seem to get a breakthrough. I can't seem to, everyone, because when Greg went through his deliverance, like, he actually saw Jesus. Jesus took him through. He was in heaven. He saw the animals. He saw all these different things. He sat on the lap of Abba. He saw all these different things happen for him. And so in me, there was a longing. It was like, wow, God, like, that's great. Like, I'm so glad that he's being used now. And I'm so glad that he's the head. And I'm glad for all these things. But there still was this, what about me? I think it was Christmas time, and we had a whole house full of friends and visitors that stayed, and it was the last night, and everyone was leaving, and I think it was about January 2nd. It was after the New Year. One of the people that was one of the friends of my son came and asked my husband and I if she could ask us some things about God and if we could explain some things and how it happens. And during that time, we were sitting with her and my son, and my husband, God was using him. God was speaking through him. God was allowing her to understand, more and more through what my husband was saying. So after that, we went to go to bed, and my husband went to sleep. He fell asleep, and then I went into the bathroom, and I was just so sorrowful. Like, I was so sad, and I began to cry and weep to the Lord. And I told him, I was just like, honestly, I was like, it's not fair. I said, I've been the one for 20 years holding things down, and I've been the one seeking you, and I've been the one praying and fasting, and like, why are you using him and you're not using me? Why aren't you speaking to me? I'm expressing all these things to God. And this is, some people may not understand, like, you said that to God, but that's our relationship. Like, I've always been transparent before God. I've always just poured out what I felt and given it to him. And I think that's what's created our deep relationship. And so I actually told him, I said, God, if you're not going to use me, then just take me home. Like, I don't want to be here. Like, if I can't do your work and if I can't do your will, then there's no need for me to be here. And I was honest with how I felt. And so I was crying, and then I came out the bathroom, and I was trying to be very quiet and be silent because my husband was sleeping and my daughter was sleeping. And I didn't want to wake anyone up, but I just, so I was laying there, and I thought I was very quiet, and I began to weep, and I was still crying. And so then my husband woke up, and he turned to me, and he said, are you okay? Is everything all right? And I just said no, because again, I'm very transparent. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat how I'm feeling. So I began to tell him exactly what I told God. I said, I just don't understand. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that God is using you, but I just don't understand why I can't hear his voice like you do. Why doesn't he speak to me the way that he speaks to you? And God began to speak to me through my husband. And there's a little thing that we joke about in my family, and those who are close to me and friends, they know, like, if we're going somewhere and the weather is saying it's going to rain the whole week, it's going to be cold, and I'll say, I just pray, and I'm like, Daddy, I need this weather to change. I need it to be X, Y, and Z. And then all of us, not all of a sudden, but every time it changes, every time it adjusts for me. So as I was laying there, and God was speaking through Greg, he basically said to Greg, like, girl, don't you know I change weather for you? So that's exactly what he said through Greg. He said, when you pray, things move in the spirit, things happen in the spirit. And everything that has come to pass with your husband, is because of your prayers for over 20 years. And nothing would have transpired in his life had you not stayed consistent and prayed and fasted for 20 years. So don't, basically he was saying, don't ever underestimate who I am in your life because of what I'm doing in someone else's life. And he was like, if you want to hear me, tomorrow you'll hear me all day. And he also told my husband, though your gifting is not his gifting, he told him, you're gifted in healing. You have the gift of healing. And I'm going to begin to move in that gifting. And he said some other things. After Greg had told me what God was saying, he said to me that when I was crying, he was hearing a little girl, but it was like, I think faint. And he was like, it was like in the spirit, he could see it was a wall and she was behind the wall. So all of those sessions when the deliverance pastors that I went to and I had sessions with, the reason why whenever they would be trying to speak to little girl, which was the spirit of rejection, she couldn't hear, and she was behind a wall. So the way that Greg was explaining it to me, so when I was crying, he said that in the spirit, it was like a wall shattering and falling down. And once that wall was shattered, he saw a little girl peeking around, and she was scared. And she said, is it okay for me to come out now? And so that was the spirit of rejection. And so Greg spoke to the spirit of rejection, that spirit, and told her, he said, it's time for you to go. Like, she doesn't need you. A lot of times spirits act like they're trying to protect you. And he told that spirit of rejection, you have to go very softly, very subtly. You have to go, you have to leave. She doesn't need you anymore. And from that day, that spirit of rejection that I had carried all my life because of the neglect, because of the word curses spoken over me, and many other things, it left. But the next day, from the moment I woke up to the time I went to sleep, I heard God, and I heard him clearly, and I heard him distinctly. And so one of the instances that I will share from that day, there was many things that he said. Like, I was reaching into the closet to get something, and I was trying to find it, and he said to me, do not toil. This will not be the year of toiling for you. If something's not fitting, if something's not working, leave it alone and move on. So after that, we had everyone up here, and Greg wasn't feeling that well. So we had cooked and everything, and made burgers for those that were leaving. And God told me to go to this restaurant in Wallingford. And I'm like, are you sure, God? Because first of all, the restaurant is a little expensive, and we had cooked, and I don't like wasting money. So I said, we got burgers here, God, so anyway, I'm laughing, God's speaking to me. And he was like, go to the restaurant. So I went upstairs and I told Greg, I said, God, I feel like God is telling me that we need to go to this restaurant. So he said, okay, if that's what God's telling you, then let's go. So it was around 4:00 and it was just him and I. And we went to the restaurant, and the parking lot was empty. The waitress that came over to our table, so she came over to our table, and so there's a thing like with my husband, when God is speaking to him and he wants him to tell somebody something, his stomach starts like rumbling and it won't stop. And so she left the table. She came, she said hi, and then she left. And so Greg told me, he was like, I'm feeling like God is saying that somebody is sick, and that he's like, I don't know if it's one of her children, but someone said God has shown me I think it was two kids. And so he was like, so, he had to ask her, he had to speak to her. So he asked the lady, he said, do you have kids? And she said, yes, I have 2 twin boys. And he said, is somebody sick? And so she paused and she looked at us and she said, I am. And she said, that's why I'm here. She said, I have cancer and I'm being treated at Smilo Cancer Center. And I'm from Staten Island, but I was taking the train back and forth and it was too much. So I'm staying with a family member, but I'm waitressing while I'm here and while I'm getting my treatment. So as he begins to say, she begins to say that, and she's like looking at him and she's like, how do you know? Like, how do you know these things? Like, how did you know? So he's just explaining that it's God, that God had sent us there for her and that we were going to pray for her. And so as he's talking to her about things and he's, prophesying and telling her what God is saying, I began to feel my hand like just moving. And so I kind of knew, like, oh, that's what he was saying with the gift of healing. Like, my hand would not stop moving. And so he said to her, he was like, can we pray for you? Like, we're going to pray for you. And so she was like, absolutely. So he's like, nothing spooky, just put your hand down and my wife's going to touch you and I'm going to pray. And so we began and I touched her. And as I touched her, she was looking at me like, I can't even explain it. Like, she saw a ghost and she just kept staring at me. And so after we prayed, she said, like, what is that? What is that power? What is that power? And then I went to the bathroom and then Greg spoke to her a little bit more and she was just saying, there's something, with your wife. I don't know what it is when she touched me. That was my encounter. But one thing that I will say, and when you're dealing with deliverance, and what you have to understand is you always have to be watchful. You always have to, when you are delivered from a spirit, you have to watch, because those spirits, if you're not careful, they will try to creep back in. And so in my life, I've learned to always, look for that. Like, what am I really, when it comes to certain things and how I'm processing it, or am I processing it from a spirit of rejection that's trying to come back in, or is it truly what I'm feeling? So I'm very careful to, I know how that spirit operates. I'm very careful to call that spirit out if it's trying to come back in and take authority and control over that spirit or anything else. So that's my story. That's my transformation. And there will be more to come.